This program is made possible in part by a grant from Charlotte Metcalf.
Early morning hours of July 10th, 2016, a young staffer for the Democratic National Committee was murdered as he walked home from a bar. Without any real evidence, Seth Rich's death became a focal point for efforts to debunk the story that Russia hacked the DNC to help Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. Today's guest, however, tells us that the conspiracy theories around Seth Rich's murder have a remarkable origin: Russian intelligence. He's Michael Isikoff this week on Story in the Public Square. Hello and welcome to Story in the Public Square, where storytelling meets public affairs. I'm Jim Ludis from the Pell Center at Salve Regina University. Alongside me is my friend and co-host G. Wayne Miller of the Providence Journal. Each week we talk about big issues with great guests, authors, journalists, artists, and more, to make sense of the stories that shape public life in the United States today. To help us this week, we're joined by legendary investigative journalist Michael Isikoff. Over a remarkable career, he's unpacked the stories told to take the United States to war in Iraq. He's exposed presidential wrongdoing, and now as Chief Investigative Correspondent for Yahoo News, he's exposing the conspiracy theories around Seth Rich's murder in a new podcast called Conspiracyland. Mike, thank you so much for being with us.
Great to be with you.
So for anybody out there who doesn't know who Seth Rich was, who was Seth Rich?
Seth Rich was a 27-year-old Democratic National Committee staffer living in Washington in the summer of 2016 during the presidential election, working on voter protection for the DNC. One late night in July of that year, he's walking home from his favorite bar very late at night, early Sunday morning, and he is gunned down in what police quickly concluded was a botched robbery. There had been a rash of robberies in his neighborhood, about 30 blocks north of the Capitol that summer. You know, it was a tragic event. The police were unable to identify the assailants, but it had all the hallmarks of one of these armed robberies that had been going on. Very soon afterwards, strange conspiracy theories started to pop up on obscure websites and chat rooms suggesting that he had been murdered as part of a political assassination. The suggestion was the Clintons had him murdered because he had information about corruption within the DNC. Within a few weeks, this starts to get promoted by Roger Stone, the president, then candidate Donald Trump's longtime political advisor. And then Julian Assange at WikiLeaks suggests in early August that Seth Rich had been his source for those DNC emails that he unleashed on the eve of the Democratic Convention. Now, there was really nothing to that suggestion. Seth Rich had no access to the DNC emails. He was a junior level staffer. There was no evidence at all that he had any communications with WikiLeaks. But Assange's suggestion in an interview which he first gave to a Dutch TV reporter was a way of deflecting from what we now know, where Assange did get those emails from Russian intelligence.
So let's pick that thread up, because
yes.
you actually backtracked and traced the origin, the very first point where that Seth Rich murder conspiracy rumor gets started. Where is it, and what's the provenance of it?
3 days after his murder, July 13th, 2016, a very obscure website called whatdoesitmean.com that when you look at it, it's pretty clear it's a vehicle for Russian propaganda. First asserts that Rich was murdered by a squad of assassins working for Hillary Clinton. Nobody knew where that came from. It seemed such a bizarre, outlandish idea. But we, for this podcast, Conspiracy Land, we tracked down the then assistant U.S. attorney in Washington who was in charge of the investigation into Seth Rich's murder. And she, a woman by the name of Deborah Sines, and she was puzzled by this weird, bizarre story and went to the U.S. intelligence community to try to figure out where this was coming from. And what she gets back is that there was a intelligence bulletin circulated by the SVR, which is the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, their version of the CIA, that asserted exactly those details that were in the whatdoesitmean.com.
We've got a little sound from Conspiracy Land with Ms. Sines talking about that. So let's roll that right now.
Sure enough.
The original report alleged that Seth thought he was meeting with the FBI, and instead he was met by a Hillary Clinton hit team. The original reports also alleged that the hit team was captured after a running gun battle with U.S. federal police force just blocks from the White House.
So there's nothing in what was in that Russian fake intelligence report.
It was completely preposterous. I mean, first of all, the assertion was that Seth Rich was on his way to talk to the FBI when these squad of assassins masquerading as federal police officers gunned him down. It made no sense at all. First of all, it was at 4 a.m. The FBI is not, waiting to interview somebody at 4 a.m. if it's not a national emergency. So it made no sense. But here's the thing: that idea then begins to migrate to these alt-right websites. It gets, as I mentioned before, seized on by Roger Stone, who tweets a picture of Seth Rich on August 9th, suggesting he was another victim of the Clinton body count. And then Julian Assange picks it up. And before you know it, this is getting traction on all sorts of sort of alt-right, fringe, conspiracy, right-wing sites. What's remarkable as we trace the story, this is a 6-episode podcast, and what we tried to do in here is sort of put under a microscope how disinformation works. So it starts with this Russian plant. It gets picked up by these alt-right websites and alt-right characters like Roger Stone. It gets fueled from Julian Assange. And before you know it, we're into 2017, and it's being promoted from inside the Trump White House. Steve Bannon, then senior counselor to President Trump. We have text messages that he's sending to a CBS 60 Minutes producer saying that Rich's death was a huge story. It was a contract kill, obviously. Those are Steve Bannon's words.
While he's working in the White House.
While he's one of the top advisors to the President of the United States. And before you know it, we're into May 2017, and Fox News picks up the story. The biggest cable network in the country is now broadcasting that Seth Rich was the source of the emails for WikiLeaks. And this is, why were they pushing this? It discredits the Russia narrative. Sean Hannity, night after night for a week, is pumping this story out, saying, you see, this whole Russia stuff, it's all bogus. The real story is Seth Rich.
So go back to the roots of this conspiracy theory when it first started. Why were alt-right groups and other individuals so fast and quick to embrace this? What was their motivation? We can understand how perhaps Fox News or the Trump organization might embrace this theory, but why would people not involved with either group do that?
Well, first of all, I mean, these are the alt-right folks and Roger Stone. They're all Trump supporters. Remember that by the summer of 2016, there's a lot of talk about what the Russians are up to in our election. We only knew a fraction of the story at that point, but we knew a lot. And we knew that the Kremlin had connections, ties, was cultivating people in the Trump camp. We knew that Trump was saying all these nice things about Vladimir Putin. It seemed inexplicable to a lot of people, but we knew that Trump had tried to do business in Russia. So there were elements of what we now know to be the full Russia story that were out there. And then, you know, that summer, just a couple of weeks after Seth Rich's death, is the WikiLeaks disclosure of the DNC emails. That really gives new fuel to the Russia story, because there were many who believed at the time and were asserting, the Clinton campaign was asserting, this is coming from the Russians. What better way to deflect from that? Pushing out the Seth Rich story.
So did these early groups and later groups and individuals actually believe this? I mean, conspiracy theories, in some cases, the conspiracists do believe it. In other cases, they use it for political. Any sense of where, or was it all over the place?
There's an enormous amount of cynicism behind a lot of this. But did some of these people believe this? Sure. Sure. I mean, if you are inclined to disbelieve everything the U.S. government says, if you are inclined to believe that your political enemies, in this case the Clintons, are irretrievably corrupt and would stoop to anything to win, then you can convince yourself of that which is politically convenient to believe, which is that the Russia narrative being pushed by the mainstream media is bogus, and we here on the alt-right have the real story.
So the podcast is really, it's a deep dive, it's a sophisticated look at Russian disinformation, and you talk to a lot of people, members of Seth Rich's family, experts on what the Soviets then and now, the Russians, how they use this tool. One person you talked to in particular is John Cipher, who's a veteran of the CIA, has spent a lot of time looking at how these tactics and techniques work. Let's take a listen to him talking about Russian active measures beyond Seth Rich.
Right.
A large percentage of the anti-vaccine pushing on social media is pushed by the Russians. You know, a large portion of the take a knee against the NFL thing was being pushed by the Russians. They're looking for ways that we're attacking each other inside the country and, again, exploiting that. So the Seth Rich conspiracy is a perfect thing for the Russians to attack onto.
So this is part of a bigger Russian play than just the 2016 cycle.
Right. You use the phrase active measures, and that's something that we talked to John Cipher about quite a bit. Active measures was the term for what the Soviets used to do in the Cold War, which is to promote disinformation and conspiracy theories designed to discredit the United States. There's a vast body of literature on this at this point, including from former Soviet KGB defectors who talk about how they pushed stories out about how the CIA assassinated John F. Kennedy, about how the Pentagon unleashed AIDS into the third world, and they would go to various obscure newspapers, give them phony documents, circulate them, and then watch as stories like this would get traction in the third world, and that served Soviet ends.
And I think about, so I'm familiar with.
And let's remember, Vladimir Putin, what is his history? Former KGB officer steeped in these sorts of techniques.
There was in the Cold War, when they were running that AIDS operation, that took years to gain traction.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
In the age of social media.
Like that. like that. One stroke of a push of a send key, and it's out there, and then others are picking it up, liking it, retweeting it, pushing it out there, and the speed with which these conspiracy theories get traction is accelerated exponentially.
Were there efforts by legacy media, established, respected journalistic outlets to push back on this and expose this as nonsense?
You know, some, you know, you're always in a tricky situation about how to deal with this. If you write about it, are you giving it traction? Should you be paying it any attention? Will it just die of its own, you know, dead weight, or do you need to correct it in real time? The breakthrough that we had in this, in just retracing, is first Deborah Sines. She was enormously helpful, and she had never spoken before as the federal prosecutor. That was entirely new. The Steve Bannon's role was entirely new. It's something we broke in conspiracy land. And then dissecting how that Fox News story came about was you know, a lot of fresh reporting. So I used my, you know, investigative reporting chops, such as they are, to try to put this under a microscope, and it, you know, became a much more compelling story than I ever imagined when I started out reporting on this.
What's the threat to democracy?
You know, it is hard to overstate how really insidious this sort of thing is, because disinformation in the social media age, where everybody is living in their own silos, just going to Facebook pages and Twitter accounts and cable news stations that reaffirm their own prejudices and preconceptions and block out any alternative facts that would contradict them, is, you know, is the way we do business now, right? And so how do you have honest political debates? How do you have a serious discussion of the issues facing the country when everybody is in their own silos and, you know, adopting their own conspiracy theories about the way the world works? It's, you know, and look, you know, we saw what the Russians did in 2016, and the social media component was not something that was known back in 2016. I talked about what we did know, what the Russians were doing. We only learned about the Internet Research Agency's operation in the United States well after the election. Facebook was selling ads paid for in rubles to this Russian troll operation in St. Petersburg without, you know, any acknowledgement that there's something fishy going on here. And yet this was, as we've since learned from Robert Mueller's report and Senate Intelligence Committee and other disclosures, that this was a big part of what the Russians were doing. Well, the Seth Rich case was a part of that. And, you know, this adds to the body of evidence of how a foreign adversary was interfering in our democratic dialogue.
So you already posed the question of the day or the year or the era, which is, how do you break people out of these silos? Right. Or has that train left the station?
You know, that is a really tough question, because you know, we have the stratification of the media, we have the polarization of the electorate, you know, we have these rival cable stations, Fox and MSNBC, presenting two completely different versions of reality. Right. And let's not make this exclusively a right-wing thing.
No question about it.
MSNBC has pushed stories about the Russiagate that went far beyond what the facts are. There was Lawrence O'Donnell, who was talking about how Russian oligarchs had signed co-signed loans to Donald Trump with no evidence to back it up. But that's what his audience wanted to hear, right? Just as Sean Hannity's audience wanted to hear about Seth Rich.
That's where the numbers are.
To discredit the Russia story. And the more red meat you can serve your built-in audience, you know, the better your numbers are, the more money your cable station makes.
Your advertising.
You know.
And meanwhile, Vladimir Putin is over in red square smiley.
Even Putin aside, I mean, that's just a terrifying scenario.
Yeah, no kidding.
For a republic that's predicated on some sort of reasonable discourse and politics being a vehicle to actually resolve the hard issues, right? And if we create a system where there's nothing but purity in our politics and no opportunity for compromise because we're compromising around agreed on fact patterns,
right,
we're doomed.
Right. And the technology is getting more and more sophisticated.
By the minute, virtually.
By the minute. You remember back in May, there was that video of Nancy Pelosi speaking at a Washington think tank, in which the video that pops up on YouTube had been deliberately slowed down, so she seems to be slurring her words and confused and is drunk. You know, think about the impact of something like that in the last days of a presidential election, where you can manipulate the video and have somebody, you know, actually, that was a fake video, but
you can create such videos
now
from
with
scratch.
Artificial intelligence, you have this technology for deepfake videos where you can actually have people saying things they never said. Right.
And we're seeing some of that, and we're going to be seeing a lot of that, I'm guessing, in 2020. Yes?
Last days of the 2020 election, you know, deepfake videos in which, you know, whoever the candidates are shown to be saying something completely at odds with their political interest. What would be the impact? How quickly, you know, can that rapidly get traction before people
you can
like me can
Yeah.
unpack it and say, no, this is completely bogus.
So we're raising these questions, and frankly, I'm looking for a glimmer of hope here.
Right. No, I wish I had one for you.
I mean, I'm almost begging for one.
Right. And again, I want to come back to, this is not a left versus right thing. There was a company called New Knowledge in Austin, Texas, that last year during that special election in Alabama between Doug Jones and Roy Moore, decided they wanted to see if they could replicate what the Russians had done, but from the left, to help the Democratic candidate. So they create a phony Facebook ad of Baptist teetotalers suggesting that Roy Moore was supporting a statewide alcohol ban in Alabama. Why? All those country club Republicans in the suburbs of Birmingham would be quite alarmed at the idea that their Senate candidate wanted to take away their vodka and tonics at the country club. You know, the opportunities for mischief here is very great and very dangerous.
One of the things that has struck me as being woefully lacking is the congressional response to this. So there was a sound and fury of a lot of hearings. Mark Zuckerberg got dragged to Washington. There was a lot of legislation tabled. Facebook said, we're going to regulate ourselves, and it disappeared. Like, there's been no congressional action on this issue whatsoever.
Right. Well, these are the big issues, and you know, then you get into the political power of Silicon Valley and all the lobbyists and money that they can pour into congressional and presidential races. You know, these are extremely wealthy people. With wealth comes power, the power of money. So yeah, doing something about and policing Facebook, Google, Twitter, all these big social media giants that have transformed our information age is a real challenge for democracy, and we'll see how many people have the guts to stand up to them and try to address these issues. You know, policing, you know, they're tough issues. Do you want to have Facebook censoring what news you can read or not? On his face, no. On the other hand, do you want to allow them to just completely sort of allow on their platforms this disinformation? These are tough issues. They require a lot more time and attention than they're getting.
Getting back to Conspiracy Land, why did you decide to do this as a podcast? You're a distinguished journalist. You could have done it any number of ways.
Right. I like to do different things. I like to experiment.
I like to hear that. Yeah,
I like to branch out. It has been apparent to me for some time that podcasts are cool. They're something that more and more people are listening to, long form. I can't tell you how many people tell me they, go to work or take long drives on their vacations, listening to podcasts, listening to Conspiracy Land.
Working out at the gym or...
Right, exactly. I mean, I've had one for Yahoo now for the last couple of years called Skullduggery, which is an interview, much like you guys do, by Dan Kleidman, the editor-in-chief of Yahoo, and I.
Love the name, by the way.
Have been doing that. We've had great guests and get great traction for long-form interviews that can really go into depth. That's one form of podcast.
Yeah.
Conspiracy Land, it was a completely, scripted it's storytelling and long form storytelling. I enjoy doing that. I've written, several books. This was a new way of doing it, and we've gotten phenomenal response to it.
Well, congratulations. It's important work and fascinating work.
We got about 40 seconds left. When you take a look at the political environment right now, particularly around impeachment, do you have any crystal ball predictions about what to expect before the 2020 election?
I think if we've learned anything in the Donald Trump era, predictions are an exceedingly risky thing to do. It doesn't seem to me that the needle has moved substantially on where the public is, and probably more importantly where the Senate is. So the House can go through the impeachment process, but absent amazing new revelations, and even then, with the stratification of the media, I'm not sure it would make any difference.
This was not the uplifting, hopeful conversation we were looking for, but Michael Isikoff, it's an important one, and we thank you for being with us. He's Michael Isikoff. The podcast is Conspiracy Land. You should check it out. That's all the time we have this week, but if you want to know more about Story in the Public Square, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter, or visit pellcenter.org, where you can always catch up on previous episodes. For G. Wayne Miller, I'm Jim Lutis, asking you to join us again next time for more Story in the Public Square.
This program is made possible in part by a grant from Charlotte Metcalf.